I'm really absolutely delighted to introduce Pastor John Funnell to you. He is the author of this book, What God Can Do with a Little Oil. And I know people are rather down on X as a social media platform, but I've discovered a sort of little rich vein of Pentecostals on X who I follow and engage with great interest. And I think probably via some of them, I came across John and started following him, and then saw this book. Bought it, and it's the story of how it says a poor Welsh chapel facing closure has been transformed into a thriving community. And I just think it's an amazing story, and I'm absolutely thrilled that John is with us to share it. So, John, it is great to meet you. Thank you for being here. Um, and well, do you want to just begin by telling us some of the story of what the church was like 10 years ago? Tell us a little bit about its setting and how on earth you ended up to be called there. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for inviting me. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. The Lord is blessing the Eastern Valleys of Wales, and it's my honour and privilege to share this reality with you. I came to the church in 2014. It had a membership of half a dozen, all elderly, which tragically made it one of the biggest churches in the Eastern Valley. Our street alone has 7 chapel buildings on it, echoes of previous revival days, of which only a few were open when I came. We're a valley of 10,000 people. I estimate not much more than 30 were attending all the churches in our valley. There was 2 men that I knew of that were regular in church attendance. The valley suffers from horrific social deprivation. Um, if I may digress slightly to thoughts as to why, we lost nominal Christianity about 30 years prior to everyone else in mainland UK. The miners' strikes um, created a community without God, and people left the chapels for the workmen's halls, um, and that fabric of Christian culture departed the Welsh valleys from about the 1970s. As I'd argue, in the UK, it was probably at the turn of the century. So what we've got here, the social deprivation here in the Eastern Valley, is what is coming for everywhere else if the tide doesn't turn. We're looking at 4th generation unemployment, double the national average for free school meals in Wales. And Wales is a relatively poor country anyway. 72% of the children in our local school are in single parent homes. Um, we have the highest amount of children per percentage in the care system in the whole of Europe. I've got another ministry out in Romania, and I serve gypsy villages in Romania, and they don't have to deal with the deprivation we have here. So
Mm.
it is a real rough, tough place, utterly secular, um, a real difficult place to get the gospel out. So there's the context.
And you set out the story of what you did. There was a letter to 1,000 local people early on, wasn't there? That was one of the
Yeah,
things you did to kind of reach out.
yeah. So what I did 2014 when I came, as I said, I'd be blessed if I had 6 elderly souls in the congregation. We're a very conservative, traditional Baptist chapel. You can imagine all the wood paneling and the big balcony, all empty, bar one little row of devout elderly souls. And we would I'd preach them every Sunday. Every Wednesday we'd have a prayer meeting, and they were very special times. Um, and then we looked at ways to do outreach, and wrote a letter, basically saying, "Dear neighbour, I've moved into the area with my wife and kids, and I'm here to serve you as local pastor. Here's my details. Whether you believe in God or not, I'm happy to talk." And I knocked on 1,000 doors, and when they opened, I handed them the letter. Um, I did this out of a real concern for the people in our valley, where it had been secular for so long. They were suffering with the consequences of sin without anyone being able to minister to them. Um, if they wanted to get married, they would go to the registry office. If they wanted pastoral support, they'd go to social services. All their support was secular. And I thought there's no light of the gospel in this situation. So my initial thought was to get out into the community and just let them know that I'm here if they need or want me.
And you tell all kinds of stories of the fruit that flowed from that.
Yeah,
One of the things that really struck me was what's become clearly a kind of massive local, well, not just local institution, this carol singing under the arch. Do you want to tell us the story of
yeah.
the arch and how that came
Okay.
about?
I don't know if I include this in the book, but we got burgled. So we've been burgled 11 times in 10 years. I live on the manse, which is on the church ground. So between myself and the chapel building, we've been burgled several times. The nature of being welcoming to all means people that would do that kind of thing. And we had four men in my house, and they took lots of things, and the community were in uproar. And we were in the local press, and they created GoFundMe pages, um, and we managed to get the value of everything back just by donation. But it was approaching Christmas, and we wanted to strike while the iron was hot. We knew that the community were engaging with our plight. And just across the valley to us, there's an old mining arch. It's this huge train tunnel leading to the British mountainside. It's called the British because it was owned by British Coal. And you'd have coal and iron come through through this tunnel. The site there with Abersychan used to have 40,000 residents, and that site was one of the biggest iron foundries in the world. Now it's just grass and it's been reclaimed by nature. The population here has dropped to 10,000, so three-quarters have moved away for work. Um, but yeah, this old mining arch, it was home to used old mattresses and white goods and maybe gangs of predominantly young men in fast cars, um, smoking cannabis and various other drugs. It was a grotty old arch. And I went to the council and asked whether I could do a carol service there. And they laughed it off and said, yeah, why not? The comment was, it's that crazy vicar and a few old women with a torch. Let them carry on. Well, the first one we held, I think we had over 600 people come. And from then on, we've hosted over 1,000 every year. We get the local schools involved, local dignitaries come and speak, and I preach the gospel at these events. I joke each year that every week I invite you to come to a nice family-friendly church, and you won't, but you'll meet me under this grubby arch. Um, but they love it, and yeah, they come every year. During the pandemic, we had to stream it live for obvious reasons. We had to pre-record it and then stream it as live because if they knew we were there live, people would have come to watch us record it. So we had to do it at a secret time. Local brass band we were recording, and we had 15,500 people watch it live, and then over 18,000 people watch it, where the expats from the valley were able to access the event, and that made it national news. But again, it was almost Billy Graham rally-esque. Yeah, a wonderful time to reach out to the community and for them to hear the gospel. And I think the location also played very much into our hands in regards to the story of the incarnation, light in the darkness, that in the least likely of places, God incarnate enters. And we're under this disused, hopeless, grubby mining arch that's abused. And for that one night a year, um, the light of the gospel shines through it, and it's beautiful, and it unites the community. Yeah.
It's amazing. And throughout the book, you use the widow's oil and 2 Kings 4 as this sort of story that really informs the whole of it. I mean, what would you say you have learnt about God's provision through this journey?
Yes. Okay. That's a wonderful question. Um, when I started, I was in full-time secular work for the first 5 years. I was, as Paul says, a tent maker, not literally, I was in business. But I couldn't be a burden to the church. They had no resource. We had about 8 weeks in the bank when I came. Yeah. So when God's call is upon your life, you can do no other than answer it. And as hard and as broken our community is, God has gifted me with a supernatural love for the people here. And many have let me down. They come from utter brokenness, utter unemployment. They don't get out of bed for anything. There's this benefit culture here that makes them utterly dependent. They feel entitled, and you can't rely on them at all. Yet God provides. And can I fast forward to the kind of numbers we're getting now, or am I jumping the gun?
Well, give us a taster and then I'll ask you something else.
Yeah. So we serve around 300 people a week now as a church, and our regular congregations on a Sunday are 150, 170. Our biggest demographic is young men under 30, which I can talk about later. But I come up to the pulpit every Sunday to preach, and I often weep because of God's provision, because of his great grace. I see miracles of God every Sunday morning when the flock at Nodffa gathers. Um, yeah, the Lord provides.
I mean, one of the reasons I was really keen to speak with you was you say on page 63, as it happens, I'm looking at my notes, he can revive any church.
Amen.
And I think for resource for us as an organization, that's would not be a bad banner to kind of go across the front of the website, as it were, to actually have faith for that.
Yeah,
And I worry that sometimes in the church, too often, if say we are, as you were, presented with literally a handful of elderly faithful Christians, we
yeah,
think, oh, well, God can't do anything with that. And it seems to me if that's what we really think, we've actually lost the gospel, haven't we?
yeah.
And that's why I think I find your story so encouraging.
And like many Anglican churches, we had a very small elderly congregation and a huge facility to maintain, huge costs without any denominational help because we're an independent. We're Baptist by conviction, but we're independent. So we really had nothing. So when churches come to me and say, I don't have the time, I don't have the resource, it reminds me of a lady I actually laid to rest on Monday, Nancy McComb, who was one of my originals. She passed away a few weeks ago at 102. Now, when I first came to the church, she was in her early 90s. And she said to me, as I was working the doors, she said, John, if I was 10 years younger, I'd be out with you. And I thought, well, 10 years ago, you'd be in your 80s. And the valleys are a unique situation. It's uphill to go anywhere and it's uphill to get back. So it's not good for walking. But I said to her, pray, and your friends, your neighbours, your care workers, witness to them. I can sow seeds by the thousand, you plant and nurture the ones and twos for me, Nancy. And she did faithfully. Um, yeah, and she was a wonderful mentor to some of our young men that have come from prison and drug addiction. And if you ever want to see the lion sat with the lamb, um, it was Nancy McComb, this little old lady. She was the lion, and these tough young men with all the tattoos cowering under her mentorship. Yeah. Mm.
Wow. I mean, you there are so many things we could talk about, but you move on in the book to some of the principles that you feel you've gleaned over the years. And one of the ones that I was particularly fascinated by was for you, the place of tradition.
Yeah.
Just paint a picture for us of what Sunday worship looks like.
Yeah. So we have a number of our Anglican friends come to Nodffa to spy. I've recently found this out. So people get excited. There's another new man at the back, another new lady, and they're actually in ministry. But what they report back is how pleased they are to see traditional hymns being sung. Um, this is a message that um, has been repeated and proven true throughout 2 millennia of Christian history and throughout Bible history. If you succumb to the cultural whims of the world, you will fall. But if you hang on to the gospel, God will bring life. And, in our context, in a hardened community like ours, but I think this applies everywhere, people have survived because of tradition. And to throw it away for a trendy church plant, you'll only gain the fickle and you'll lose the committed. And I think I say in the book, when Jesus says new wine for new wineskins, we forget that he says that out of care for the old wine in the old wineskins.
Hmm.
And I'm a father of four, and I remember when my kids were growing up fast. My oldest is 18 and in the Royal Navy, but when he was born, I didn't leave my parents and focus on him. We raised him together as a family, the three generations together, and the church should be the same. Um, so we have created a culture that leverages tradition for the sake of the gospel, and that's important. So if in the valleys, particularly, they want bread from a baker, they want meat from a butcher, and they want chapel to be like where their grandmother went. And if I came in with a hoodie and a guitar, singing songs about Jesus being my boyfriend, I'll be a cult leader. They wouldn't give me the time of day. A contemporary view of church has its place in more cosmopolitan areas, but we've seen well-meaning people come to the valleys with this romanticism about revival, and they don't last because they come and impose their view of church onto a community. And I don't see that in scripture. We worship a God who is incarnational. So the verse that led my strategic thinking in revitalizing Nodffa was Proverbs 18:13, which is those who answer before listening bring upon themselves folly and shame. And I fear that because of 2 millennia of Christian history, we as Christians have forgotten that we have to earn the right to share the gospel with people. And we've got to listen first and love them. And in listening to people, you'll realize how best to minister the truth to them. And, if people came to Nodffa and heard something from Hillsong, that they would think this is odd. I remember we had a church meeting in a workman's club, and someone came from another church and they wrote a Christian song as an Oasis song. And he said, I'm hoping that this will entice people to the gospel. I said, no, what they'll do is they'll go and put Oasis on the jukebox because Oasis do Oasis better than you do. But when we started singing Bread of Heaven, they remember that from the rugby. They remember their grandparents singing it to them, and you've got them. So we compromise on everything bar the gospel, but we also do not forsake tradition for the gospel. A message is only as strong as the bridge that it's carried on.
Mm.
And I'm not going to build walls because of a desire to be seen as contemporary. I was invited to consult on, I won't name names, but to consult on a very famous Bible study course that wants to rebrand for more working class or benefit class areas like myself. And forgive, this is a contemporary reference, but we don't want a Jacob Rees-Mogg dressed as an Ali G to try and reach the youth. I hope some of you get the reference. What people in communities like ours long for is authenticity. And if you're a man who wears a suit, wear a suit. If you're a woman that's happier in a dress, wear a dress. Don't put a baseball cap the wrong way and speak in Gen Z terms to try and appeal. They'll just see right through you. So yeah, we leverage tradition. You know, in the chaos of life that's here in our valley, they want to come to church and see people that they can trust, that are respectable. And to do that, you need to leverage tradition. Tradition has been a wonderful tool for us. Absolutely.
I find this just so fascinating in terms of the kind of unspoken prevailing orthodoxy that can sometimes be, for many of us on the call, will be within the Church of England. And so I think you're provoking us in a very helpful
Yeah.
way, in my opinion. But I should say the chat is open, and if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make, please do pop it in the chat. And in a few minutes, I'll draw on some of those. So if there is something you'd like to raise or ask John, please do that. I want to take you on to what you call the blessing of 2024, because this, I said to one of my colleagues, I actually shed a few tears reading this the other morning. I have been really affected by your writing. And towards the end of the book, you talk about various days in September 2024, and we've agreed you're going to just read your entry from Sunday, the 22nd of September, and then just please comment on it further as you wish, John.
Thank you. So perhaps I should give some context before I read it.
Yeah, do.
We are a Baptist chapel in the Welsh Valleys that is incredibly conservative in our theology. There's your context. Yeah. It's a Sunday, the 22nd of September. We welcomed more visitors today, including an assistant pastor from Cardiff who had heard of what God had been doing at Nodffa Church, and he came to see it for himself. We began with prayer, we took communion together, and we sang hymns. It was a normal Sunday. We have a block of 3 hymns before the sermon. At the end of the final hymn, nobody could sit down. There was a pure and powerful silence. This lasted for many minutes. There was an influence over us all. A full church of all ages, babies and toddlers. Not a sound from anyone. Our mouths were silenced. This was followed by weeping. I could hear grown men sobbing. We all knew that Jesus was standing with us. We were all in shock and awe. Time became an illusion. For all we knew, we could have been stood there all day. Everything just stopped. It was authentic and unplanned, all of God. I was yet to enter the pulpit. It was nothing of me. God simply came. We got to the end of the hymn where we would all usually sit down. Nobody did. We all stayed standing for Jesus without prompt. He was with us, and with Jesus came utter holy silence. At that moment, there was no doubt that Jesus is Lord. Nobody in our chapel that day could have left an atheist. Every saint standing would have taken a bullet for Jesus at that moment. In the imminent silence, every word of the gospel was not simply believed as true, but became true for us. In the power, the weight, the glory, the silence, I guided the flock to prayer. We then had the day's Bible reading, and I began to preach. By God's grace, salvation came, especially with the young. In particular, a young lady of 16 years who identifies as a lesbian. She had threatened to slit my throat a few weeks prior. She repented and knew forgiveness. So that was during a 3-week season of blessing last September, where the Lord was very present with us. We had a taste of revival. Praise the Lord.
And how have you found yourself reflecting back on that?
It's not as if it has stopped. We had this 3-week period of his presence known and felt. And it was followed by 8 weeks of horror as several in our church were diagnosed with cancer, heart attacks, there was a suicide, Bell's palsy. All my leaders, one of my elders, a young man, relatively young, early 40s, he was rushed into hospital with pneumonia and pleurisy. My trustees, just everyone that played a key role in the church seemed to get really sick between then and Christmas. And it was as if God blessed us with his presence. He poked through the cosmos to say, I'm here for you. And the church, where it might have been a house of cards without that blessing, it allowed us to stand firm. And it continues. I feel as if it's like the tide has risen and it hasn't gone back down yet, although it's not as unusual now. But when we gather, the Lord is with us and the church continues to grow. And it's wonderful. We had, and this is very rare, we had a family converted who were Jehovah's Witnesses during this period. Lots of young men come to, there's one young man who's the son of an Indian Muslim who's become an atheist. He walks 4 miles to get to our church. He crosses over a mountain to get into our valley. It's incredible. And we've been speaking about revival and being students of revival. We live in the land of revivals. We're thinking, is it a revival? It doesn't seem to be spreading out. And that there was a comment made, I think I mentioned it in my book, that there's a gentleman in our church, and he was saying revival would look very different today in the valleys because there's no community. You heard stories of 1904 and 1859 and others where men would go down to the pits, to the coalface, and be converted underground and come out in their droves singing hymns. Everyone now is so atomized. They're in their council flats smoking cannabis and playing computer games all day. There's no community element for the Lord to bless through. And it makes me think, has the 10 years at Nodffa Church been a process of building that infrastructure to bless through? Um, as I said, we serve 300 plus a week through our various ministries, and that's we serve them with the gospel. Um, we've got a school, we've got a theological training school as well, but a secular school that we work in partnership with. Um, we have Bible studies throughout the week. You know, one in five of our valley work, and if they do work, they're in low paid shift work. So they can't always get to us on a Sunday. So we say, well, we'll do church Thursday night, we'll do it Wednesday night, we'll do it Monday night, Wednesday morning. We have so many different times throughout the week where people can come and study their Bible, be discipled, sing God's praise. Um, have we been, is it a local revival? Because we've got that infrastructure and community within the church for God to bless through. It's a very special time, and it continues.
Yeah. But in a sense, you very much set out those 10 years of building those links with the community and doing that hard, unglamorous work of building trust
Yeah.
and people then coming in various ways.
And perhaps I should touch on that. So I use 2 Kings 4, the story of the widow's oil, as a thread to undergird the narrative. And the premise, you'll have to read the books yourselves. But the premise is that we were the widow crying out to God, crying out to Elisha for help. And over the last decade, we've repositioned ourselves back to being the Elisha. And I mentioned earlier, I'm a secret Anglican. I'm very jealous of Anglicanism. I love your tradition. I love the fact that there's not a village in the UK where you don't have a presence. Um, Friends, culture has changed, but the problem hasn't. Um, Everyone out there is innately sinful and needs to be reconciled with God. The only thing that has changed is that as a church, we've lost our position in society for people to come to when they're in need of forgiveness. And what we've done here in our little valley is reposition our chapel from the fringe, from being the widow who has lost everything, to being the point of contact where people run to when they're desperate. So now our
Actually, oh,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. No, just Andrew asks actually, do you want to just outline some of these ministries that you have to the wider community? You've
yes,
mentioned the school.
yeah. So we've got a school of 21 pupils. So it's a learning hub for those that are not PRU. Do you have the PRU? Do you know the PRU? It's like
Pupil
one,
referral unit.
yeah, pupil
Yeah.
referral unit. It's not that because we couldn't keep them safe or ourselves safe. It's not additional learning needs either. It's for those that are disenfranchised from traditional academic models. So they do English, math, science with the school, with secular teachers that come in. And then as a church, we provide life skills for them. So we teach them mechanics, bricklaying, cooking, and they help out in a number of ministries. So we have a food bank, and the kids will come, the pupils will come and help run that. And they'll do more maths doing stock taking for our food bank than they would in a term of maths lessons in a classroom. So the deal I made with the school, you see it, there's a number of churches that partner with schools where they provide a hall for them to come and learn in. That you cannot do anything in Nodffa Chapel unless we get a chance to share the gospel with you. That's the rule. So you can have it for free. We want to share the gospel with you. Um, so we provide this provision with these kids, 21 of them. They've started coming to our youth club. Some have started coming to church. Some are now professing faith. Hallelujah. And you can know the Lord's hand on what we're doing here, in that there's many schools in Wales that are getting accosted for their Christian emphasis. And we're a church where the schools are coming to us for help, which is wonderful. But yeah, we have food bank, we have homeless ministries, We have a helpline for men who suffer domestic violence, because there's not a refuge bed in Wales for a man in that situation. We have, oh, there's all sorts, lots for the youth, um, coffee mornings, you name it. But the key is to listen to your community. Don't copy what we've done in your area because it might not work. The principle is listen. You know, rather this is an appalling example, but it gets the point across. You could say that this Saturday we're going to try a bake sale, and you put on this bake sale, a cake sale, thinking that you've met with a community in the middle, and they'll come in, and then you'll be very disappointed that no one comes. And it turns out that your community are all um, uh, glucose intolerant, and they wouldn't eat a cake. You know, the church comes up with all these weird and wonderful ideas to reach their community without listening to their community first. Um, and the struggle is once you listen to them first, you realize how far away they are from God. And actually, it's further than you'd be willing to go um, to get them in. Um, you've read in the book, there's I've had to be called out at 3 o'clock in the morning to hospital where people have had suicide attempts. Um, that hasn't been uncommon. That's almost an annual event. Um, you know, when you get out into that community, you've got to be prepared to sacrifice and go the extra mile. But if you do go out into your community and listen, I promise you there will be gospel opportunities, and that will lead your intention on what groups to start in the church and what ministries to offer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
Um, Katie asks about the role of prayer and, has this experience changed how you've prayed? I mean, I was very struck that you write you offer listening as the kind of first principle, and within that, listen first to God in prayer and then listen to your community. But do you want to
yeah,
give us a picture of some of those prayer meetings with
yeah,
your elderly faithful in the early years, and what kind of foundation that laid?
yeah. Thank you. So our first year was marked by prayer. That's all we did for the first year. And this was a midweek meeting. It'd be 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. Um, there was an elderly lady, Doreen, in her 90s, and she could only walk with the assistance of a Zimmer frame. But where the prayer meeting room is, because we're in the valleys and everything's like that, that the chapel is on like three different tiers, and she had to go to this back room, and there's loads of steps for her to go to, and she couldn't take it with a Zimmer frame, and she was so proud in a right way, a righteous pride. She had dignity. That's a better word. She refused any help. So she'd leave her Zimmer frame outside the chapel and crawl on all fours to get to the chair she'd sat on for 9 decades um, to pray. And it reminds me of the Mary Jones story. Uh,
Yeah,
the just to see it, and she'd come out of breath, but she would pray so sweetly. But as I said, I'd be lucky to get half a dozen on a Sunday. There might have been four of us on a midweek meeting, but we would pray for hours, hours. And these aren't your stereotypical charismatics. These are old-fashioned Baptist conservatives. Yet the Holy Spirit was with us, and we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And still today, every meeting we have at some point is a prayer meeting. And we have moments where we'll pray in silence. We'll have moments where we get into groups and pray collectively. Um, but every moment is a prayer. We saturate everything we do with prayer. It's so important, and there's no coincidence we've had this growth um, um, alongside this prayer.
I mean, we sometimes rashly say, no church is too, well, I hope we don't say it rashly, but we do, we say no church is too small, too old, too, and I sometimes say too far up the valley or whatever, to
Yeah,
be beyond God's ability to, but there are times when I feel I'm saying this more as an act of faith than but what would you say to anyone on this call who is perhaps either weeping over their own church or acutely aware of other churches that are in a very similar situation to what you described at Nodffa 10 years ago?
I think of the man at the pool of Bethesda. He is very much every Welsh chapel is this man. He's sat on his mat for years waiting to be healed. And he makes the excuse that, well, I'm waiting for the pool to be stirred. And when it is stirred, I can't get there. And what does Jesus say? He says, pick up your mat and walk. He says, pray for workers, for the harvest is plentiful. Go, I am sending you. The people he calls to pray for the work, he actually sends to do the work. God is incarnational, he's active. There's a famous preacher called Gypsy Smith. Don't know if you've heard of Gypsy Smith. They say that he preached to more people than anyone in human history, only surpassed later on by Billy Graham, and that was aided by modern technology. But he has this famous line, he drew a circle around himself, and then he would get on his knees and pray. And he said, Lord, send revival, start within this circle. And, if you want to see revival, you can't conjure revival. God will work in his time. But if he's put that burden on your heart to live out your faith, live it out. Live it out. And I suppose that this ties in with the point I was going to make earlier. We were the widow. Now we've become the Elisha. So our best evangelist now is sin. Not that we don't have evangelists, not that we negate the work of an evangelist, but you hear of all these big strategies and projects to employ evangelists and school workers. If you position your church in the centre of community as a place where people can run to, as the widow does in 2 Kings 4, people will come to you naturally. Half the work's done. And that's what we've done here through much sweat and tears. No church is beyond revival. We're the least likely. We're in the poorest valley, landlocked poverty. What good can come from Abersychan? Yet the Lord is blessed and makes me emotional. Hallelujah. Have hope, please.
Yeah. Well, I suspect I'm not alone in finding this very stirring. If there are any other contributions people want to make to the chat, please do. We've got another few minutes before we turn to prayer. Can I just ask you a little bit more about some of the lessons you talk about? Not being a fixer but a pointer. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So when you're dealing with people with such social dysfunction, and I wasn't clear about this in the book, but I'd come from similar. I see now, I look back on my early years and see how the Lord was preparing me to come alongside people from broken homes and what have you. By nature, you want to try and help their situation. But what I learned rather quickly was you become part of the problem. If you try and get in and help practically, when it inevitably goes wrong, you're to blame. So, yeah, I came to learn the greatest man born of woman, according to Jesus, was John the Baptist. And he said, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Follow him. And that message is still true today. And it helps you draw that line that you will have to draw at some point when you reach out into community, the rich young ruler line, when to let people go. And it's been able to say to them, look, the answer to all your problems is this person, Jesus. And until you're willing to take him seriously, there's no point me helping you any longer. I'm here for you. I love you, but I can only help you if you're willing to follow Jesus. Yeah, you're not fixers, you're pointers.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you've mentioned, the number of burglaries, which I'm sure had an impact on your whole family. But as someone's
Yeah.
asked specifically, what has this journey been like for your family? Because obviously, it's not just about you, is it?
No, exactly. It's been wonderful. I've just written a piece actually for a very big Christian publication on um, rest, and it's important for you to rest in ministry. But I fear that so prior to going into ministry, I was relatively successful in business. I was a director of a multinational, and I had lots of staff globally. And I fear that a lot of these self-help books that are entering the Christian marketplace, well, they're embarrassingly outdated because they're what I heard 20 years ago from various HR departments. And I think they're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where they're making um, the ministry sound like work.
Mm.
And they're doing that by compartmentalizing family life and ministry. And they're giving an appearance that ministry is something that you can clock on and clock off from. And if you're in a ministry where you need to clock off, um, your family will see that. They'll see that distinction, and you will lose authenticity, and that will breed resentment with your kids. And yeah, you'll start begrudging your calling because it'll be like work. And if you treat your ministry as a job, then your church will treat you like a service provider. But if you live out your faith in the home as well as you do publicly, and be a parent, an under shepherd to your church, they will respect your time and capacity. And that's what we've done as a family. My kids, who have all done incredibly well, have shared every step with me when safe to do so. Obviously, there's various protections that you need to put in place, but ministry is incarnational. It's not a job, it's a calling. And I can no longer stop being Pastor John to my community, no more than I can stop being the father to my children.
Mm.
I can say to my kids that go in the other room, your dad just needs a bit of peace for 5 minutes. But if they called me saying, Dad, I'm in trouble, I'm there. And I think that's how we're losing a culture war. And Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, at best you'll be sustaining. We need people to go the extra mile,
Mm.
and to please pray that the Lord will give you a supernatural love for your parishes, because then it ceases to be work. It's a joy to serve. Every night of the week I'm out. I'm married to Superwoman, which really helps. She's amazing and supportive. But she understands, it's very rare we get time together, but she knows this calling and she shares in it with me. And to not compartmentalize church and family, but to bring them together means that my family don't get the leftovers. They get the main meal with me. And they have a church full of aunties, uncles, brothers and sisters that that have raised my kids and given them a broad perspective on life.
Hmm.
And now they're becoming young adults and they're incredibly successful young people because of it. I hope that answers the question. I kind of waffled on, but I hope it got the point.
John, I mean, just huge thanks. This has been amazingly stimulating and moving actually for me. So thank you and bless you in your ministry.